do now in the last session, we have a unique opportunity to talk to one of our most experienced journalists, a lady that has been involved in most of the big media houses, News 24, currently where she is. And I had a discussion with her and I said to her, I would like her to address the media response on a crisis, but I would also like her to talk to us about the role of the social media, because the media is a specific kind or a specific way of dealing with news. And the social media is something completely different. But Mahlatse said to me, she will kind of do an introduction and she would invite questions and answers and have a very nice interaction with the students and all the other participants. So Mahlatse, it's over to you.
Thank you very, very much, Theo. I hope you can all hear me, and good afternoon. I think since we started talking about this very important event that you were organizing, our topics have evolved with the times that we face in South Africa. I mean, as I speak to you this afternoon, I probably, the last time I had a straight 8-hour sleep was the day before former President Jacob Zuma was actually arrested. The next day, we literally only went to bed at around 3:30, just obviously following what was happening outside of Nkandla, and then just waiting for that convoy to finally arrive at the Escort Correctional Services. So I don't have any slides, and I will be just sharing with you my thoughts, and then, as Theo said, I'll then take questions from you. I mean, I thought it's quite an opportunity to speak about the media in a time of crisis. But I think we have to give context to where we find ourselves as a country. I think the reality is that we are facing a crisis of proportions we've never seen in democratic South Africa. We have a crisis of security where many of us don't know if we are going to see a repeat of the widespread looting that we saw unfolding right in our very eyes. We are also facing a leadership crisis where we are seeing those that are supposed to be giving us some confidence that they have it under control, involved in a tit-for-tat blaming game about who actually failed the country, where the reality is that those that lead us from the president down, there was a failure when we saw infrastructure, key infrastructure being destroyed, and the looting that we actually saw unfold. I think that we are also facing a crisis as a nation where I don't think many of us have it in ourselves to dig deep again and, you know, be hopeful and believe in the miracle that is South Africa's democracy, just given all of what has happened. And at a time when many of us are still navigating this uncertain period of COVID-19, working from home, working in isolation, and also not having kind of the social connectedness that we always have to navigate life in general. So I think as a country, we are going through a crisis. And I thought I would just talk to you about you know, the scenario that I've just painted and how that impacts newsrooms across South Africa. So there's no doubt that the news cycle in South Africa is punishing. It is unpredictable, it is exhaustive, and every single day, as somebody who started in a newsroom 22 years ago as an intern and having operated in many different portfolios as a health reporter, politics reporter, foreign correspondent in a country like the Congo, and then managed newsrooms as a political editor, and now as an editor-in-chief, we are in a very testing time. Every single day, we are facing very difficult decisions on what to cover and what not to cover. We know our mandate, we know what our role is in society that is looking for answers and that is looking for information. But we are not able to cope with the demands of the developments in South Africa because newsrooms have become smaller over time. You know, we used to operate at a time when, you know, if you were a radio reporter, that's what you did. You were a radio reporter. Now we are expecting our reporters to do everything from film, write the stories, do a radio report, also write for online, and your diary always has more than one event as part of what you are covering. So we start off our morning having to make very difficult decisions about what to cover and what not to cover. And the events of the past few weeks have been particularly difficult because we've had to send reporters out to, you know, super spreader events, essentially. And when our reporters are still not vaccinated, and that's quite a daunting task for any a newsroom manager, because you are literally sending out a reporter and putting them at risk. You know, while many people have the option of working from home and choosing their spaces that they want to enter, our reporters in the process or in their duties of delivering information to South Africans, they actually don't have a choice. And then what happens when they're out there, they have to face a very hostile crowd, and often they're actually attacked. And as an editor, you literally operate with your hand to heart and just holding and hoping for the best. I mean, in the past 2 weeks, we had a reporter, I think it was on Saturday, following the violence after Zuma was put at Escort Correctional Services in GP's town, where the riots had actually started. And I had to be on the phone with him for about 30 minutes as he tried to navigate his way out of a chaotic situation that had turned violent, and police were firing rubber bullets, stun grenades. And at that time, he was struggling to just be able to establish himself as a media person, and was afraid of being caught in the crossfire that then ensued. You know, we've had reporters go out in the middle of the night, despite the risks that are out there, because the violence, you know, unfortunately doesn't happen only during the day. You know, police did a lot of the work that they were doing in the evenings. The other challenge is that we are also operating, and I guess I can say this to you guys, given that you are people that can help us steer our economy and steer our businesses. We are operating at a time that media houses are really, really struggling. The financial model for most media houses has always been to attract advertising revenue. But when you're operating in a depressed economy and your clients are likely to not advertise and spend money somewhere else, you then find yourself in a crisis. And, you know, one CEO was telling me that as they were trying to navigate COVID and the impact of COVID, in the last week alone, because of the looting that we saw happen, several companies pulled their advertising, and that cost them about 8 million rand. So, because just think about it, if, for example, Fly SA can't fly to a certain place anymore, they will pull that ad because it no longer serves a purpose. If shopping centers are having to shut down, they can't be running adverts saying that, you know, come to our mall and come and shop. So that is the crisis that we are facing. The industry has really bore the brunt of a struggling economy, the political uncertainty, and also just people desperate for direction. And I think a lot of the time people struggle with understanding why as a country we should worry when smaller media houses are shutting down because they can't survive, or mainstream media has to reduce the number of reporters because of financial constraints. That puts our own democracy, lack of a better word, at risk, because in any democracy you need accountability. And I think that if you look at the past decade, it has been the role of the media and the work of the media that we are finding ourselves where we are today. The State Capture Commission being a key. Every time there's a new witness that takes to the stand, if you were to search, do a Google search, a media company had covered parts of that testimony or parts of that story. And in essence, we have that State Capture Commission of Inquiry because of the work that journalists have actually done. So in my other role as the Secretary General of the South African National Editors Forum, the sustainability of media houses is a big worry, and especially ensuring that they remain capacitated and able to deliver. And then in a time of crisis, the one thing that we are learning is that traditional trusted media becomes even more critical. We saw it with the break with COVID-19 in March, where as much as media houses lost revenue, advertising revenue because of the lockdown regulations and basically companies having to in part shut down or slow down, etc. We also saw massive traffic to credible news outlets, whether it was television or even the online platforms. I mean, my own website, ewn.co.za, I think in those months we saw almost a million, over a million unique users going to our website. And all of that, when we did the research, was that in a time of crisis and in a time of misinformation and disinformation, people look to credible media houses. We have also seen that exactly happen now during the pandemic. The exact numbers will come in later, but we are already seeing them anecdotally because, and which leads me to the topic of the role of social media. There is so much happening on social media and people just don't know what is truth and what isn't. Yes, some people believe that what they see on social media is the truth, but in reality is that it is not. And some people thought that traditional media houses will struggle to survive because of social media, but actually we are seeing the opposite. When people want credible information, they want verified information, because there is a huge difference between what I post as Mahlatse Mahlase, the editor-in-chief of Eyewitness News, and the website, and just random people that are on the website. At the moment, you know, there's so many videos that are going around in terms of what exactly happened in Phoenix, as an example. But some of those videos we have not been able to verify, and some of the traditional media houses have not been able to confirm that those events actually happened, the date of those events, because sometimes some of the stuff that is being posted is not verified and we can't track the source of it. So the difference between us and social media is that we have a huge responsibility that everything that we are putting out has at least followed our own editorial processes, and also we are bound by either the Press Council or the Press Code or even the Broadcasting Complaints Commission. And, you know, also people think, you know, just because somebody has posted it, then it has happened. And then often we find when we then go back and do try and verify it, we find that some of the videos are dated or they've been manipulated. And essentially we can't find truth to those things. Yes, social media plays a huge part in our own news cycle, because often it can give us an opportunity to track, or it can give us a tip-off about a story. We'll see it, and then we will then do the journalistic work of verifying. I mean, I think at this point I can talk to what happened to the decouplets, for example, you know, because I can imagine somebody saying to me that, well, if you guys follow journalistic processes, what happened with the decouplet story, as an example. And, you know, that story remains such a huge worry for us because of how it puts to question our credibility as an industry. Because many people, you know, didn't just see it as an independent media house story, but they saw it as a story being reported by the media. And then us as journalists, we're also differing on what actually happened, and then even confusing the public more. And that's why we had been pushing for some kind of independent inquiry so that we can put the matter to rest. But I think that was an example for me of when a journalist failed to follow our own ethics and our own rule guide in terms of verifying a story. Because using a story like that, as soon as somebody says, I'm pregnant, expecting 10 babies, even though you will see the stomach and see it grow, or it is somebody who is a trusted source who is telling you something as huge as that, you will start saying, can I actually speak to your doctor so that I can speak to them about how they are managing such a miracle, a medical miracle, so to speak, you know? And that's how you would then have verified the story. The story is so big that, you know, nobody would be able to help a mother give birth without planning and months of planning. And just using as an example what happened to the mother in Mali, who had given birth to, I think, 9 babies a month before. So, and I'm just using that as an example to say that when we have to put out something as journalists, we have to have done the basics so that you, when you receive it, it's actually verified. The other last thing I just want to say about social media, which is quite a challenge for us as an industry, is how it has become a vile place for a lot of our reporters. There's a lot of unidentified people. There's a lot of orchestrated campaigns to attack and to discredit journalists. And it's so vile that, you know, journalists on those platforms have been threatened with anything like from, you know, you will die, to rape, to actually just body shaming, and also just the worst kind of insults that anybody would have to bear, you know. And that's another big worry for us, especially because you also want to contribute to information dissemination on social media because of the growing numbers of people who turn to the platforms for that. But sometimes, you know, you have to weigh up what it does for your own reporters who are on those platforms trying to engage. I say, you know, when we were younger journalists, the most feedback you would get on your stories would be, you know, when callers call in to give comments or email to the editor, etc. But social media allowed for that immediate reaction and to be able to gauge, even though it's not a fully South African public, to hear what people's reactions are. But it's equally a very dangerous place for journalists. And then just as I finish off and allow for you guys to do ask me any questions that you might have, you know, it's that we are in a very difficult political environment as a country. And we find increasingly that politicians use the media as a scapegoat. And part of the campaign is to spread lies about reporters and repeat them loud enough so that they become part of the lingo, and to try and discredit journalists as opposed to them being held accountable for their own actions. I mean, there are so many examples that I can use. The EFF spread something saying that there's a Tumamina group, which is a bunch of us news people who have formed some coming together so that we can defend and protect the government of Cyril Ramaphosa. And I'm always shocked at how many times the Tumamina group is being repeated as an attack on reporters, or to say that I and my colleagues are biased and are not fair in coverage. But then when I open newspapers and go to our online platform, there is every day some critique of the role of the president himself in leading South Africa, and also his government, and then his party. And, you know, this dates back from the Bell Pottinger days, where we had former President Jacob Zuma and the Gupta families basically putting money aside and investing in discrediting the media because of the questions that they were asking and the spotlight that they had placed on the former president and his relationship with the Guptas. And as a result, you know, terms like white monopoly capital have stayed with us and have not left. So sometimes the kind of propaganda that we face as the media stays on for so long because of the deep pockets of those that are behind those campaigns to discredit the media. Yeah, I think I'll pause there
Thank you. What I'm going to do, I'm going to play a journalistic trick on you. Usually the journalists ask the politicians 4 questions. The politicians then only answer the questions that they like. So I'm going to ask you 4 questions, but I want you to answer all 4 of them. The first question is from me. In my presentation this morning, I looked at the situation in KwaZulu-Natal and I posed 3 questions. What is it that we've got? Do we have an insurrection? Do we have a failed coup? Or do we have economic sabotage? Those are the words that I pick up that politicians use freely and different people. What would your take be? That's the first question. The second question is coming from one of the students here. Let me just get the name, where he's asking, what are the chances for the media in South Africa to experience what the media currently experience in Eswatini, where there's actually a clampdown on the flow of information? The third question is an interesting one. It's from Lome Dreyer, and she asks, do you agree that true press freedom is one of the biggest ways in which we can keep state corruption in check and hold politicians responsible? If so, do you think that South African media is actually assisting in the fight, or are we simply reporting what's occurring and chase sensationalism? And the last question, the fourth one, is what has been the impact of social media, fake news, and that kind of issue on the revenues of the media itself? Is the social media putting the media under pressure? Let's take those 4 first.
All right, okay. I'm going to ask that we do 1-1 because my memory escapes me. But I'm going to just start with that first question that you asked, Theo, and just take you through my own processes as an editor. So we first called these riots, and at the time we called them riots because there was, between Friday and about Sunday, people that had gathered with placards that were calling for former President Jacob Zuma to be released. That we did see, and we characterized those as protests and as riots. But as the days went by, we could see that this had evolved into something else. When we started seeing the rolling looting the rolling looting of shopping centers, it became clear that this is now looting and it's no longer a protest, because even those people that were stealing, that Gogo that we saw with her 6-pack, in her mind, when she invaded that liquor store to go and steal that 6-pack, it was not about free Jacob Zuma. That was not on her mind. There was obviously a criminal element that had actually also creeped in. And that's why we started moving to calling it looting. And then the bigger question of whether it is economic sabotage, an attempted coup, an insurrection, I think that we don't have concrete answers as yet, because we have not seen the kind of evidence that possibly gives us a concrete answer. However, if you look at what has been attacked, where you had the deliberate shutting down of B3, that was designed to cause some economic chaos. The burning of trucks, while it has been a common thread in South Africa during the violence to attack and satellite the trucks, when you link it to also the shutting down of the N3, starts telling you. And also we had ICASA talking about some communication infrastructure that was also to cause disorder. And my belief is that even those that started it, I think, quickly lost control of it because of the criminal element that creeped in. Does South Africa's socioeconomic conditions have something to do with it? Perhaps I will agree that when the criminality was an opportunity, that might have kicked in, because in a country where so many people are unemployed, the opportunity to obviously go and break into somewhere to get food, to get clothes, to get those necessities, then became something that people would do. So maybe in a setting where people had a lot more to lose, using that in inverted commas, you wouldn't have created that. I think all of these things, whichever way you look at it, have the potential or had the potential to upset the governing party and to upset the government. And I think if you look at it, it was an attack on our democratic order. The basis of it, at least, was exactly that. I don't know. I'm convinced that those that started it lost control of it, and I don't think that they imagined it spiraling into this. And if they did, then we clearly were facing something bigger. So I think somewhere there is the truth between economic sabotage and insurrection, but all of it combined talk to an attack on our democratic order. Okay, and then the second one was about whether the South African media would face a clampdown similar to Swaziland.
That's right.
So, yeah, so we are lucky comparatively to the rest of the continent that we have a constitution that guarantees the media's right to do their work freely without fear of fate. Yes, during the Zuma years, there was very orchestrated government attempts to shut down the media, whether it was the signal jamming in parliament or the media not giving access to the precinct, or some things, attempts to have the secrecy bill so that they could declare certain things classified and therefore threaten the media with imprisonment if they published that content. Right, so those were the kind of signs that we had that we could face an attempt by the government to muzzle the media. However, having said that, we are still facing challenges, as I've described, whether it is politicians on a very open campaign to discredit the industry, from calling media Stratcom, which is quite a massive thing if you think about what the role of Stratcom was in an apartheid era, and likening democratic South African media houses to a vehicle of apartheid to suppress, and it does a lot of damage to the industry. But in the Ramaphosa era, we have not seen the government taking an active role in attempting to muzzle the media. However, as I end off this, COVID-19 has posed some serious challenges. We are not able to go to press conferences the way that we want to. Zoom facility, as Theo was saying, doesn't always allow you to get that answer from a minute. There are those, you ask 10 questions and then they choose which ones to answer and just brush over. So the ability to do follow up, to press on an issue, to do door stepping has been taken away. I mean, we have expressed our disappointment with the fact that President Cyril Ramaphosa continues with now what we first called family meetings, and now I'm calling monologues, where he addresses the nation and doesn't take questions. I mean, even Donald Trump, in the worst times of Donald Trump, was taking questions from the White House correspondents. And I think that has been a disappointing element by the president. And I think it has limited the media's ability to hold him accountable. And also, we are finding that increasingly, it's just tricky to get some ministers to do interviews. I mean, there's a few that I can mention. I mean, Pravin Gordhan is one of them, where we, I think half of the media houses have probably given up in trying to get a sit down with him at a time that he is leading a department that is in charge of some key entities in driving our economy and just understanding what has happened. I mean, you look at the partnership that happened with SAA, so many questions were there, but I don't think anybody has managed to do that sit down to actually get answers from Pravin Gordhan. So the living in isolation and the COVID regulations has had some limitation to what the media can actually do and how it can actually do its work. And we are navigating through this. It's not easy. The one thing we were able to do is force for daily briefings from the minister and the presidency now in this crisis. Are we getting anything from those? It's questionable, but at least we are posing the questions, and hopefully we will continue doing that so that we can get answers. The other one was, I think it was from Drea.
Yeah,
yeah. Drea. Sometimes I'm just trying to go up. Just remind me again, Theo, what it was.
Yeah, and the question was the press freedom is kind of a pushback against corruption, and are the media doing enough to expose what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think that our democracy has been tested in so many levels in the past decade. And I will count the media as one of those last line of defense, as much as people have also talked about the judiciary and some of the Chapter 9 institutions that were well led. And I think the media deserves to be in those, in the group of those characterized as the last line of defense of our democracy. The fact that we actually had the ANC eventually deciding to recall former President Jacob Zuma was in part also the work that the media did. I mean, we must never underestimate the role of the Gupta emails that were uncovered by the media houses and the relentless investigative reporting that the media has done throughout, and persistence in covering the 9 years of former President Jacob Zuma.
And was it not Mandy Rousseau that took the pictures of Nkandla that eventually became a constitutional crisis, so to speak?
Yes, it was actually. She was the first person to actually write the story of Nkandla and expose that there were government processes that were being basically disregarded in trying to build this palace for the former president. And it was also the media that also exposed the arms deal corruption that today we are still, I don't know, 2 decades on trying to prosecute the former president over. And that was the work of the media. And then anything from what the media has done now in exposing the corruption related to COVID-19, or even exposing the extent of impact of the pandemic on ordinary people, and even pushing for a better rollout plan and vaccines to actually be delivered, and even the suspension of Health Minister Zweli Mkhize. That has been the role of reporters. And I think that we are lucky that we still operate in a country where we do have a media that is still able to do the exposés and actually shine a spotlight and ensure accountability from our politicians. Yes, we don't always win. Sometimes the media uncovers so much and there's no action from the political side. And you know, that's the sadness of it all, because some might say that in European countries, if this that has happened in the past 2 weeks had happened somewhere in Sweden or even England, we might have seen an immediate sacking of the security cluster ministers. You know, in South Africa, you know, you have a minister implicated in a scandal about stealing money that is needed for vaccines and a health response, that his son got a car here, and this person that he claims is just a comrade, but we all know was a close associate of his, he's suspended and not fired. You know, I think sometimes maybe people lose patience with the media and not necessarily with the government of the day. Is there last?
Yeah, no, the last question, last of the fourth. But before you answer, I just want to make a brief announcement, because you have in your comprehensive answers answered some of the further questions, but that's fine, we'll get to them. I just want to make the announcement that we're going to ask Andries Wessels to thank you 2 or 3 minutes before 1, And then I'm going to ask the Deputy Director of the school, Professor Jan Meyer, to do the final word of thanks for today, so that they can just prepare their little speeches ahead of time. But you go on to question number 4.
There's the pressure. If social media has put pressure on journalism, I think that was the
especially the financial part. Are they making it more difficult to sustain your industry?
Yes. So there's an estimate out there that almost 80% of online advertising goes to the Googles, the Facebook, the FANGs, as they are actually called. I mean, that is money that could have gone to media houses, and that's money that's essentially leaving the country. And that is why we are struggling as an industry, because, you know, just to show an example, a newspaper ad, maybe in the Sunday Times, would cost something like 100 and something thousand rands, you know, but to advertise on Facebook and to reach even more people, a company might spend as much as 10,000 rands. That does not pay a journalist's salary, you know? And it doesn't even pay for even a senior journalist who has the experience to do the proper investigative work that this country needs to hold those in authority accountable. So it has put financial pressure on the industry. The move to digital has disrupted our industry in a massive way. There are people who no longer buy newspapers because they think they can find it online. But we have seen some digital outlets like News 24 putting up a paywall, or whether it's the Times Live group as well, Vusa group as well, because they need to find ways to sustain the industry. And one of the other challenges we have is that people say, you know, why must I pay like expensive, why must I pay for data which is expensive and still pay for a subscription fee? And that's because the data payment doesn't go to the media house, right? It goes to the telecoms. A media house still needs to pay journalists to be able to provide you with the right information that is fact-checked, that is credible, and that speaks to the development of this country. So people think that because it's on the internet, they shouldn't be paying for it. Unfortunately, to keep journalism alive, I would urge all of you to continue to supporting these media houses and actually subscribing to them as part of keeping it alive. I think eventually we will probably get to a point where many more online companies do put up a subscription page just so that they can actually survive and start getting some revenue out of it. As part of what we've been trying to do as a South African National Editors Forum is to just see if there could be like a government response to keep the industry alive, whether it's tax breaks, zero rating, all verified news outlets, etc., as part of just trying to ensure that the industry stays alive.
Thanks. Now, the next 2 questions, Mahlatse, is challenging. The first one is from Tebogo, and I'll read it to you. He says, the voice of the media is very low on the resignation of President Ramaphosa. Is he just a failure as Zuma? Why are you so mute? The second question is, to what extent is the media really independent? Why haven't you taken the issue of the CR17 funds and so on more critically on? Because it seems as if the CR17 campaign paid the newspapers. So there you are, 2 challenging questions.
Okay, let me start with the last one now about the CR17 funding. I don't think it's necessarily a media failure. I think that this country needs to get, and the way I've understood the law is that political parties have been attracting money to campaign, and individuals have attracted money to campaign within their own parties. And I think that as part of transparency, everybody should be able to open up their books so that we can know who actually has actually been backing them. I don't think it's only the president that should. Yes, there's a lot more pressure on him to do so because he now ascended to public office and leads us. And we want to be clear that whoever backed him up is not benefiting out of whatever government contracts that are out there. But I think it has to be something that is done across all parties, because there are, there are things that we hear also in the opposition benches about why some parties are holding protesting against this or the other. And I think that at least the funding act that has been introduced will start to force transparency onto political parties and to actually get there. Somebody said to me when we were asking these questions about how can it cost so much to campaign to be an ANC president? And somebody said, the CR17 campaign was the only idiots that actually opened up a bank account. Ask everybody else of the 6 presidential candidates in the ANC how much they spent. And that money would not necessarily be really far off. I think the allegations of money being used in the competition to become ANC president, the media has reported on all of those for quite a long time, and the ANC has not really done anything in terms of forcing that transparency. So I personally, my view is that everybody should actually open up their books so that we can know who has funded them and who has backed them up, because whichever side you look at it, yes, I think we deserve to know. And as part of cleaning up our politics and just making sure that there is some layer of protection around those that might actually end up in power, the transparency will definitely go a long way. And then you're asking if the media is low on Ramaphosa and resigning. Is it now over the looting?
Well, let me read to you the question. So Boko asks, Mahlatse, the voice of media is very low on calling for the resignation of Ramaphosa. He is just a failure as Zuma. Why?
Oh, yeah. Okay. I characterize the failure of leadership as an ANC crisis, that has unfortunately seeped through into our government structure as well. I mean, one of the stories that we published on EWN today was the fact that within the ANC, there are calls for Cyril to take responsibility and fall. And then there are others who says that it's time for him to not only reshuffle, but to fire ministers and have a cabinet that is representative of his own vision, as opposed to the compromise one that we have now, where we've seen the fractures play out in the public, where one minister is blaming the other for the current crisis that we are going through. Yes, I think there was a lot of expectations on Cyril Ramaphosa in terms of campaigned promising South Africans a clean government, more accountability, and that has not come through. It really has not come through. I think that actually expecting the ANC to solve South Africa's problems is South Africans abdicating their own responsibilities in terms of the power that has been given to them. South Africans can do and can vote for whichever party that they believe can take this country forward. But again, expecting the ANC to solve the problems of this country when for the past 27 years, there has been some very clear failures. I think it's all of us abdicating our own responsibilities.
You're doing very well. I'm going to give you the last question. The last question is a typical question that you will get from an MBA class. It says, are all media houses standalone businesses, or do some of them get funding from other sources? And what is the bias?
Okay, so in South Africa, the public broadcaster remains the biggest media house by far in the country, just from audience reach across radio and also television and the multiple platforms that it has. And that is not, sadly, funded by your taxes, because only 3% of the SABC's funding actually comes from taxpayers. It still depends more than 70% on advertising revenue, even though it has a public mandate to do certain things that are not commercially viable. So that is one. I work for probably the biggest privately owned broadcasting entity in South Africa, which is Prime Media. It is owned by multiple share owners, including R&B, Old Mutual, Mine Workers Union, etc., etc. And at the end of the day, it is a commercial entity and it does report to the board. However, we have quite clear lines within the business that protects the editorial independence from the commercial interest. I sit as a group editor-in-chief, and we have even our own little committee if we were to feel that there is an encroachment into the news coverage. I always use the example that, you know, Dis-Chem might be one of our biggest buyers of media space, but we have covered whatever stories that have involved them. And I'm just using that as an example. Then, of course, you've got Media 24, which is probably the biggest privately owned media house from a numbers point of view, and also the number of entities now. Independent used to be in that position, but I think sadly in the past few years, we've seen a decline of it. And I mean, they've had the biggest number or the highest number of newspapers in their group. But if you look at the numbers, they've declined quite significantly. And they were actually funded by the PIC. Some people have claimed that we should have more say in terms of the editorial misdirection that they've actually taken. So I'm just putting a few of those out. Diversity has been an issue in the ownership of media houses, but I think the company now that owns the Sunday Times, Times Live, etc., those publications is Black owned. The group that it has stations like Power FM, Capricorn FM is also Black owned by MSG, that is Given Macari's outlet. And then in the country, we have multiple small community-based newspapers who probably provide the diversity that we are seeing, whether it's community radio stations or community newspapers. But yes, they are also struggling, but they are growing at quite a fast rate. I mean, you look at Josie FM in Soweto. You know, people will tell you that if your car is stolen, you phone Josie FM first before you call the cops. And that's the kind of connection that community radio stations are having with their platforms. And that when people have that kind of connectiveness with their audiences, that's where they probably get their own independence in terms of operating the newsroom.
Thank you very much, Mahlatse. I see in the chat box, there's a lot of students sending you a lot of accolades, saying, well done, and they've enjoyed it thoroughly. But let's ask Andries Wessels to give you a formal word of thanks.
Mahlatse, this is Andries. Any democracy relies on independent media to not only support good governance, but also serves as a watchdog of the powerful. So thank you for the pursuit of the truth. Don't stop trying and don't cease to unveil the truth. Our young democracy depends on it. On behalf of the MBA students of the 21 Winter School, thank you.